Google just told Wall Street it's spending up to $190 billion this year. Not on an acquisition, not on a single product, on building the biggest artificial intelligence machine humanity has ever attempted to construct. And while investors were still digesting that number, a small team inside Google's own labs quietly did something that could make a chunk of that spending look incomplete. They didn't build a faster chatbot. They built a chip that solves a problem in under 5 minutes that would take the world's fastest supercomputer longer than the current age of the universe. This is not science fiction. This happened. And almost nobody outside the tech industry noticed what it actually means for the AI race everyone's been watching. Stick with me, because by the end of this video, you'll understand something most people covering AI are getting wrong, that Google isn't just building one bet. It's building two at the same time, and they don't fully agree with each other. Let's start with the number that made headlines this year. In early 2026, Alphabet, Google's parent company, told investors it would spend somewhere between $175 billion and $190 billion in capital expenditure for the year. To put that in perspective, that's more than double what the company spent in 2025. Most of it is going into one thing: AI infrastructure, data centers, custom AI chips called TPUs, the physical, electrical, unglamorous backbone that lets Google's Gemini models run at scale for hundreds of millions of people. And Google isn't alone. Microsoft, Amazon, and Meta are doing the same thing. Together, the four biggest tech companies in America are on track to spend somewhere around $650 to $725 billion this year, just on AI infrastructure. That's not a typo. That's close to the size of a mid-sized country's entire annual economy, spent by four companies in 12 months. Where's that money actually going? A big piece of it is funding the build-out of Google's custom AI chips, alongside enough data center capacity to meet what Google's own finance chief, Anat Ashkenazi, described as unprecedented internal and external demand for AI compute. Google Cloud's revenue jumped more than 60% year over year in early 2026, and the backlog of contracted future business nearly doubled in a single quarter, crossing $400 billion. That's the evidence Google points to when people ask whether all this spending is justified. It's also, to be fair, exactly the kind of number a company under pressure to justify record spending would want to highlight. Now, here's the part that should make you pause. When Alphabet first announced this spending plan, the stock actually dropped. Investors got nervous. They'd seen this movie before. Massive capital bets that take years to pay off, if they pay off at all. Wall Street wanted proof. And Google gave them some. Cloud revenue jumped, their AI compute backlog for enterprise customers ballooned toward the hundreds of billions, and the stock eventually recovered. And then some, climbing well over 100% over the following year. The bet, for now, looks like it's working. But while all of that was happening in public, on earnings calls and in Google I/O keynotes, something quieter was happening a few buildings over. And it's the part of this story almost nobody connects to the spending headlines. Back in December 2024, Google's quantum computing division unveiled a chip called Willow. It has 105 qubits, the quantum equivalent of the bits your laptop uses, except instead of being strictly a 0 or a 1, a qubit can exist in a blend of both at once. Think of a coin spinning in the air. A regular computer bit is like a coin that's already landed. Heads or tails, done. A qubit is like that coin still spinning, holding onto both possibilities until you're forced to look at it. That's what lets quantum computers explore many possible answers to a problem simultaneously, instead of checking them one at a time like a normal computer does. Willow did something that had eluded physicists for almost 30 years. Every previous quantum computer had the same fatal flaw. The more qubits you added, the more errors crept in, because qubits are incredibly fragile and easily disturbed by heat, vibration, even stray electromagnetic noise. It was like trying to build a taller and taller stack of soap bubbles. The bigger you built it, the faster it collapsed. Willow reversed that, add more qubits, and the error rate actually dropped exponentially. Sundar Pichai, Google's CEO, called it the cracking of a 30-year challenge in the field. Hartmut Neven, who leads Google's quantum AI division, said it was the most convincing proof yet that large-scale, genuinely useful quantum computers could be built. That announcement alone sent Alphabet's shares up over 4% in a single trading session. Elon Musk reacted publicly. Sam Altman, the CEO of a rival AI company, congratulated Google on it. When your competitors are publicly applauding your breakthrough, you know something real just happened. To understand why error correction was such a big deal, think about it this way. Imagine trying to have a whispered conversation across a crowded, noisy stadium. The further the message has to travel and the more people are shouting around you, the more likely the message gets garbled by the time it arrives. For 30 years, that's what happened every time physicists tried to scale up a quantum computer. More qubits meant more noise, more garbling, more errors, until the system became useless. Willow was the first machine to show that with the right design, You could actually add more voices to that stadium and have the message arrive clearer, not messier, because the system learned to use some of those extra qubits purely to catch and correct the mistakes of the others. But that was just the opening move. What happened less than a year later is the part almost nobody outside quantum computing circles talks about. And it's the piece that changes this from an interesting science story into something that touches the trillion-dollar AI spending race directly. In October 2025, Google's quantum team ran a new algorithm on the Willow chip called quantum echoes. This wasn't a lab curiosity. It was published in the peer-reviewed journal Nature, and it did something no quantum computer had ever done before. It produced a result that was both faster than any classical supercomputer could achieve, and verifiable, meaning another quantum computer, or even a real molecule in a chemistry lab, could confirm the answer was actually correct. The computation ran roughly 13,000 times faster than the world's most powerful supercomputer could manage. Google's team partnered with researchers at UC Berkeley, used the algorithm to predict the structure of 2 real molecules, and then checked that prediction against a completely different traditional lab technique. It matched. For the first time, quantum computing crossed a line that had separated it from being taken seriously as an engineering tool rather than a physics experiment. And here's where the story gets genuinely uncomfortable for the people betting hundreds of billions of dollars on today's style of AI computing. Because the entire AI boom, the TPUs, the data centers, the $190 billion, is built on classical computing. It's an extraordinary brute force approach. Throw enormous amounts of electricity, silicon, and cooling at the problem of training and running neural networks, one calculation after another, just at an almost incomprehensible scale. Quantum computing works on a completely different principle. It doesn't brute force its way through calculations. It uses the physics of superposition and interference to explore many outcomes at once, then lets the wrong answers cancel each other out, leaving the right one standing. So the obvious question is, does this mean quantum computers are about to make Google's massive AI spending obsolete? Here's where you need to slow down, because this is exactly where a lot of content online gets sloppy and starts exaggerating. And I'm not going to do that to you. Experts genuinely differ on how directly quantum computing threatens or helps today's AI infrastructure, and the honest answer right now is not directly, not yet, and maybe not ever in the way people assume. Quantum computers are extraordinarily good at a narrow category of problems: simulating molecules, modeling chemical reactions, certain kinds of optimization, and cryptography-related math. They are not, at least with current technology, good at the kind of pattern recognition and language processing that powers something like Gemini or ChatGPT. Google's own quantum researchers have said as much. Even Nevin, after unveiling Willow, was careful to note that classical computers would keep improving too, and that the comparison isn't as simple as quantum winning and classical losing. Some, writing for outlets like Seeking Alpha, have pointed out that quantum computing's realistic path to meaningful commercial revenue may not arrive until well into the next decade. Some estimates put broad commercial viability beyond 2035. So if you were expecting me to tell you quantum computing is about to replace the AI data centers, that's not what's actually happening. That narrative would be exaggeration, and I promised you I wouldn't do that. Think of it this way instead. Classical AI computing, the kind running inside every one of Google's new data centers, is like an enormous, incredibly well-organized library with millions of librarians working at superhuman speed, each one checking books one at a time until they find what you asked for. It's not elegant, but at the scale Google operates, it's staggeringly effective. Quantum computing works more like being able to ask every librarian in the building the same question simultaneously, and having the wrong answers quietly cancel themselves out until only the right one remains standing in the room. That second approach is extraordinary for certain kinds of questions: the shape of a molecule, the behavior of a material, breaking a very specific kind of mathematical lock. It is not, at least yet, a good way to predict the next word in a sentence or recognize a face in a photo. Different tools, built for different jobs. But here's the twist that most coverage misses entirely, the part that actually connects these two trillion-dollar stories together. It's not that quantum computing threatens to replace AI compute. It's that quantum computing threatens something AI compute completely depends on: encryption. Nearly everything about the modern AI industry, the data flowing into those TPUs, the proprietary training data, the enterprise contracts running through Google Cloud, the customer information behind that $460 billion cloud backlog Google reported, all of it is protected by encryption standards like RSA and elliptic curve cryptography. These are mathematical locks that are, for a classical computer, essentially impossible to pick within a human lifetime. A sufficiently powerful quantum computer, using an algorithm mathematicians have understood in theory since the 1990s, could pick that lock in a fraction of the time. We're not there yet. Willow, even with its breakthroughs, is nowhere near powerful enough to break real-world encryption today. But security experts have been warning about something called harvest now, decrypt later. The idea is simple and a little unsettling. An adversary doesn't need a working quantum computer today to be a threat today. They just need to collect and store encrypted data now, government communications, corporate secrets, financial records, and wait. Whenever a quantum computer capable of breaking that encryption does arrive, everything harvested years earlier becomes readable all at once. This is no longer a theoretical concern debated only in academic papers. In June 2026, the White House signed executive orders setting hard deadlines for the U.S. federal government to migrate its most sensitive systems to quantum-resistant encryption. New standards finalized by the National Institute of Standards and Technology. Federal agencies now have until the end of 2030 to move their most critical systems, with digital signature systems following by the end of 2031. Older encryption methods are set to be fully phased out by 2035. Think about what that means in practice. Somewhere right now, sensitive data is being copied and stored by parties who have no ability to read it today, filed away like a locked safe nobody can currently open, waiting patiently for the day the lock itself becomes obsolete. Governments know this. That's exactly why Washington didn't wait for a working code-breaking quantum computer before acting. They moved the deadline up specifically because the danger isn't in the future machine. It's in the data being collected right now, years before that machine exists. So picture the position this puts Google in. On one hand, it is pouring nearly $200 billion this year into classical AI infrastructure that depends entirely on today's encryption standards remaining secure long enough to matter. On the other hand, its own quantum lab, just a few buildings away, keeps hitting milestones that make the eventual breaking of that same encryption look less like science fiction and more like a scheduling question. Google isn't an outside observer to this tension. It's simultaneously building the thing that needs protecting and the thing capable of eventually threatening the protection. And Google isn't racing alone. IBM unveiled its own advanced processor, called Nighthawk, in January 2026, boasting the longest coherence time, essentially how long a qubit can hold its quantum state before decaying in the company's history. Microsoft took an entirely different technical approach, announcing what it called the world's first processor built on a new class of particles, aiming for a fundamentally more stable kind of qubit. In March 2026, Google itself widened its quantum bet even further, bringing on a new research team to explore an entirely different hardware approach, using individual atoms trapped by lasers alongside its existing chip design. That's 3 of the most valuable companies on Earth, each pursuing a genuinely different path to the same destination. At the same time, they're also pouring unprecedented sums into classical AI. Nobody in Silicon Valley is treating this as a side project anymore. Bank of America analyst Justin Post, who covers Alphabet stock closely, said after Google's quantum update that Willow's long-term significance might still be underappreciated by the market, even while keeping his firm's price target focused on Google's more immediate AI and cloud business. That's a telling combination. An analyst whose job is to price Alphabet stock today, admitting that one part of the company's story is being valued for what it does this quarter, while another part is being almost entirely ignored for what it might do a decade from now. So where does that leave the AI bet everyone's been watching? Here's the balanced picture without the hype. The $190 billion spending spree is not wasted money, and quantum computing is not coming to eat Google's AI business next year, or probably even in the next several years. The two technologies are, for now, solving different problems with different tools. But what's genuinely new, what nobody quite predicted even 18 months ago, is that the same company making the largest capital bet in corporate history on classical computing is also the company most aggressively proving that classical computing's long-term dominance isn't guaranteed. Google isn't hedging against its own AI bet by accident. It's doing it on purpose, with its own money, in its own labs, running in parallel with the very infrastructure it's betting everything on today. If you found this breakdown useful, hitting subscribe genuinely helps this channel keep digging past the headlines on stories like this one. What this really tells us is something bigger than any single chip or any single earnings call. For decades, the tech industry treated computing power as a straight line. Faster chips, bigger data centers, more electricity, repeat. Google's own labs just proved that line isn't straight at all. It forks. And the company spending more than any other on one direction of that fork is also the one standing at the crossroads, quietly building a map of where the other path leads. Nobody yet knows exactly when that second path becomes unavoidable. But for the first time, the people spending the most money betting on the first one are also the ones who understand, better than anyone else on the planet, exactly how much time they might not have.